Patrick was born the day before Thanksgiving on Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland. When he was about 3, we moved to Bay Village, Ohio, where he spent almost all of his childhood. He learned to play chess at age 5 and participated in several national tournaments growing up. He was part of the school choir from elementary through high school. In high school, he lettered in swimming and track and took second place in the high jump at the state meet.
So he always wanted to do well in school. He actually got a perfect 800 on his math SAT and ended up being a National Merit finalist and receiving a full ride scholarship to Ohio State University.
At Ohio State, Patrick majored in electrical engineering and was especially interested in renewable energy systems. Just after his junior year, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
After he graduated, he moved back in with us in Falls Church, Virginia, because he was having some difficulty with his mental illness.
He was a tutor for Mathnasium and earned a second bachelor's degree in physics from George Mason University. He also passed the Professional Fundamentals of Engineering exam.
When we moved out to Oregon, he moved out here with us also, and we started working on projects and doing things around this area too.
He stopped taking his medication sometime in May 2018, and he bought his Riverside property in August. We last saw him about 7:30 p.m. on March 31st.
They come in. I invited them in the house. We sat in the dining room, and they told me that there had been a traffic stop, that Patrick had fled the scene, that he had crashed his car, and he had died of his injuries.
Just a second, when you texted your wife to come home, your thought was he had died from injuries related to the actual crash itself, is that right?
That's what I believed at the time. At that time, I did not know that they had shot him. So then she returned home, and they filled in a little bit more details. And then one of them said that there was an officer-involved shooting. Either I said or I asked, was he in the driver's seat when they shot him? And they said yes. And I think I may have asked further questions, and at that time, that's when they said that they were not going to answer any more questions, citing that it was under investigation and they could not talk about it.
There were lots of times when we walked in the woods as a family and with the dogs, and we had opportunities for great conversation. That was wonderful. I loved it when Patrick and Chris would work together on science projects, and I would always learn something from what they were working on, except the one time when I came home and the family room smelled like smoke because they had learned what venting with flame means for lithium-ion batteries. So that was unusual.
I learned a lot from Patrick. He kind of stretched me in directions that I would not have gone otherwise, such as electrical power and electric cars. Would probably never have gotten an electric car if it hadn't been for Patrick pushing us in that direction.
And he was such a nice, sort of laid-back, kind, gentle person. He was super smart. That was evident from a really early age.
He could imagine the chessboard in his mind and play through a game without looking at a chessboard. You know, they would say, okay, knight to F7, and he would say, are you sure you want to make that move? And they would like look at the board and it's like, huh? And then they would see why it was a bad move. And in the end, Patrick won the chess game against the other two boys, and essentially the whole crowd just went, yay! Because they thought it was so cool that he could play it without even looking at the board.
He talked about wanting to get a doctorate, and he talked about wanting to work in the renewable energy field. So he had all these, I think, goals and objectives for his life. It was just very difficult for him to put them all together because of the handicap of having the schizophrenia.
He had a natural sense for the stock market and when to buy and sell, and he did quite well in the stock market and also quite well in the cryptocurrency market. In fact, he bought this property with profits from Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies that he traded.
So he took one of his electric lawnmowers that he had, and he would bring it down here and just would spend all afternoon mowing the property and clearing paths and stuff.
He really loved this property. It was someplace secluded. It's a little over 4 acres where nobody bothered him. He could kind of be by himself, very peaceful for him.
Patrick went and bought some tents, and then Chris came down and helped him set them up. So Patrick had 2 tents. He had one that he wanted to sleep in, and he had one for his electronic projects. Ultimately, he would have wanted to build something a little more permanent on this piece of property.
What do you want out of this lawsuit that you believe will, if anything, that you believe might take steps to kind of alleviate that? What is your goal from this lawsuit?
So the first thing is the accountability piece. It was in line with what we just talked about with the fairness. It's rather shocking to me, actually, that there does not appear to be any accountability in the system that we have in place. I don't know whether it's this country or this state or this community, that where somebody could stand up and say, this is not okay. You can't just break somebody's window and shoot them in the head, and they're on the phone with 911 and they're in their seatbelt without even trying to figure out what's going on. It's just, there's something just fundamentally, innately wrong with that. So what has been somewhat shocking to me is that the perpetrators of this, there's no methodology to hold them to account other than the family bringing a lawsuit and digging into all these facts and you having to ask me all these questions and pulling out my journal and airing all this stuff so that we can show that what they did was not appropriate. So it's the accountability piece. I think that's really important, or this behavior will continue. If the people aren't held to account, if the organization isn't held to account, this behavior is going to continue because there's no reason for it to stop. The second thing is the community awareness. I think that's important. I hope the community would be shocked if they found out what the details are of this and how this all went down. And so it's the community issue there. I think the community ought to be told. There ought to be some daylight on this. And the third thing is I'd like to understand or to feel that my new home here in Springfield, to where I retired, was as appalled by this action as me, that there was other people who believe like I do that this is not okay. And I don't see how we can resolve that unless they know what happened. So those are the 3 things. And the main thing is the accountability. That just something has to hold this event to account, the organization and the people.